you know. Right.
Go. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our final year-end wrap-up episode of Continuous Discussions, the online forum where we talk about Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Fell.
And I'm Anders Wahlgren. Today we're doing our end of year episode. So it's the DevOps trends, predictions, and New Year's resolutions. I haven't thought about my New Year's resolutions yet, so that'll be interesting. But a couple of things we want to talk about today. What were the driving forces of DevOps in 2017, as we see it, and what do we foresee shaping the industry for the year or years to come? And as usual, we've got an awesome set of panelists.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anders. So joining us for the first time, Jay Lyman. Jay, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. I'm a principal analyst at 451 Research. I've been covering DevOps for a good long while. I focus on cloud computing and DevOps, talk to a lot of vendors and end users. And looking forward to today's discussion. Thanks.
We're excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Mike Kavis, not new to the program. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike Kavis here. By day, I'm a principal architect at Cloud Technology Partners, helping Fortune 500 companies get to the cloud. By night, I write for Forbes and a virtualization practice and do podcasts and webinars like this.
Fantastic. Well, we're happy to have you joining us again. Tom Smith, someone that we've interacted with a lot, but this is your first time on the program. Welcome.
Yes, it is. Thanks for having me, Sam. I appreciate it. I'm a research analyst with DZone and interview IT executives for the 13 different zones that DZone is currently covering, and probably soon to be 15 in 2018.
Very nice. There's no standardization, huh? We're splintering into extra technology.
Oh, there's going to be aggregation.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, welcome. Torsten Volk, been on the program before. It's good to see you again. How you doing, Torsten?
Good to see you guys. My name is Torsten Volk with Enterprise Management Associates. I cover all of the infrastructure side of DevOps. So basically the transition from pets versus kettle and how that plays out in terms of getting out of the way of the developers. And of course, artificial intelligence, cognitive computing is a big part of that, and machine learning specifically in 2017. So that's what I've been spending a lot of time on.
Wonderful. Well, that's fantastic. So we have quite a bit of brain power among us here. Let's start talking about some of the topics that we want to talk about. And let's first start with a look back at 2017. What were the things that you guys saw that were interesting or compelling? What were the things that you saw that you knew that were coming and you said, aha, this is the year it's going to happen, and you were right? Or things that you were not so right about. Let's go ahead and start with, I got a purple shirt on my screen. That's Torsten. Torsten, why don't we have you start?
Oh man, the purple shirt gets me, huh?
Yeah.
Well, my biggest headline last year was, and that has been a headline for the last 4 years, I have to say, the praying for the software-defined data center and the praying for the hybrid cloud, really. And when I said in the introduction, I'm looking at how infrastructure can get out of the way of progress in DevOps. Infrastructure can basically be conducive instead of being a bottleneck for DevOps. Then that brain is a key topic that I wanted to see much more prominently featured. However, we all had a couple of misconceptions in terms of what machine learning and what artificial intelligence can do at this point in time. So the brain is basically there to understand the intent of the entire development process. Why is everybody doing what they are doing, and how can I enforce best practices, ensure compliance, and basically provision everything that I need in terms of resources across the development process, and of course monitor it accordingly. And we talked about monitoring in the past, right? I've also expected a lot more in terms of top-down monitoring. So meaning monitoring from business perspective versus, just more metrics and faster monitoring and cooler monitoring, traditional infrastructure from the infrastructure side, right? And a lot of vendors have gone, a lot of infrastructure monitoring vendors have gone app-centric infrastructure monitoring,
Right.
but app-centric infrastructure monitoring still doesn't make the trade-offs this brain of the SDDC should make in terms of how important is this, how much user impact does it have? Do those users even interest me, or do I bother them in favor of somebody else? So yeah, this intelligence that was a
Thing.
big part for me.
Is this sort of the converged infrastructure? Does that tie into this? I know that's a big topic that you cover.
So are you asking me, Sam?
I am.
Okay. Yes, the converged infrastructure, of course, plays into that big time. But if we say pets versus cattle, right, this transition, then even a lot of the converged infrastructure offerings are still relatively closed systems, because ideally you would want policy-driven provisioning where based on compliance rules, performance costs, all kinds of different considerations, parameters, the application would be deployed to a certain place, or bursted, or moved to a certain place. And HCI has become better there, right? Currently, the big thing in HCI is repositioning as a Kubernetes management solution, basically. But at the end of the day, when you then ask, oh, but can I also run Kubernetes with you guys on EKS, as you call it? No, of course you can't do that on EKS, right? So it steps in the right direction, but it's still pets and not so much cattle. But it's getting better would be my summary there.
For 2017. All right, great. Thanks, Torsten. Tom, what are your thoughts about 2017? What things did you see come and make an impact?
Big takeaways from the folks that I've spoken with is the realization that DevOps and cloud are synonymous. And when you put the two together, they beget containers and microservices. And the adoption of containers, which we all, I think, thought was coming, came for me faster than we could even anticipate. And the fact that Kubernetes owns the container scheduling space so strongly, yet it still has to become easier for people to use. Right. I see security finally moving up in organizations' level of importance, thank goodness, and more test automation and continuous testing.
Nice.
And lastly, a little disappointed that only 11% of organizations are aggressively pursuing digital technologies, and that's something I look to increase in 2018. And I realize it takes a while to do this.
Interesting. So I want to double tap on that. So where are these metrics coming from? 11% of organizations are pursuing digital
technologies, and I believe what the person I was interviewing was speaking to was the digital transformation.
Right. Okay.
Because legacy enterprises have so much invested in their hardware that's already on-prem, and they've got to move to the cloud. And there are companies out there helping them to move portions of their business to the cloud. So it's not a lift and shift. It's move what makes sense at this time.
Selective sort of re-engineering, right? Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Applications, what parts of our business can we move there where A, it's the easiest to do, and B, we'll get the greatest return on the investment the quickest.
Okay, so if I can sum up what I think you said, is that 2017 was the year that containers went from sort of a science experiment into, okay, this is something that everybody has to do. So it sort of crossed the chasm, if you would.
It jumped the shark.
Didn't jump the shark.
Sam, you were breaking up a little bit.
We
lost the moderator here.
Am I back?
You're back.
Candace needs to.
All
yeah,
right.
now you're back. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. We don't want to say jumping the shark. Jumping the shark is what happens when something is no longer useful anymore, right?
No,
like
it is still very useful, and a lot more companies and developers will be adopting it.
Right. Exactly. All right. Awesome. Mike Kavish.
Yeah, I'm gonna
thoughts about 2017.
Containers. I've been predicting for a while that the orchestration engines would be commoditized, and it happened a little faster than I thought. So if you look at some of the announcements at Amazon, basically serverless orchestration, serverless containers. And one thing's interesting, I've been following Docker since they were .cloud, and they basically, containers have been there forever. They've taken it out, made it easy to use, and people embraced it. But it feels like containers are going back under the covers of PaaS, like where they started, and containers and orchestration engines are being commoditized to the point where they're being abstracted away. So that's kind of the future I see for 2018 is, I'm just going to configure some abstraction layer, and I don't have to worry about all that plumbing, because often it can be like a science project getting Kubernetes up and running and doing all that stuff. So that's one thing. The other thing is DevOps itself, the advancements in maturity that companies are making. And I saw a lot of really great talks at the DOS 17, but my customers the same way. I've been working in the DevOps space for about 3-4 years, and we used to do assessments and maturity models and stuff like that. But now it's like, what's the operating model? I think they've advanced to, we got the tools going, we know what it is, but how do I gain some kind of control? What is it, a federated model? Do I push everything out to the business? So I think DevOps has moved from the technology, not saying technology is going away, but people are more trying to solve the operating model problem. How do we balance having some control with letting the business units, deploy as frequent as they need and still be compliant?
Yeah, I sort of saw the same trend with customers. I think with Kubernetes, a lot of vendors were talking about potential customers or customers that had tried to go it their own, and they did want to download Kubernetes and run it themselves and customize it with their infrastructure. And it's a little reminiscent. The Kubernetes folks might not like it, but it's a little reminiscent of what happened with OpenStack. A lot of trying to compile it, roll your own. And I think what emerged as a much more viable and successful route was a supported distribution. And we're sort of seeing that. And I agree on this sort of abstraction that a couple of years ago, folks, they couldn't hear enough about Docker and Kubernetes. And now they're more willing to sort of say, let that be abstracted away. Let us focus on the applications and not so much the infrastructure again. So I think that's continuing. And there's still large organizations that are capable of downloading Kubernetes and running it and are successful with it. But I think we're seeing some of the early failures and disappointments with that. And that is driving some of that abstraction.
For sure. Thank you for jumping in when my network was going all fritzy. I think for me, my opinion is 2017 was the year of today I'm having network problems. So that's not good. So I'm hoping 2018 will be better.
Hope triumphs over experience every time.
Exactly. It's sure never to happen again. I'm sure everything's going to be fine.
We need to go back to phone bridges.
Yeah.
I know.
No more fancy stuff.
That's right. No more of this free Google Voice stuff for us.
Analog transformation.
I'm an analog attacker.
Exactly.
Back to the basics.
Back to the basics. Wonderful. Awesome. Jay, did you have anything else that you want to share? I'm sorry.
No.
I missed
I think that...
what are you hearing your clients talk about in 2017? What were the types of things they were asking you about? What kind of challenges did they have? I would ask everybody the same question.
Yeah, well, it ties into, I think, what has already been said in terms of some top-down adoption. Certainly serverless became sort of an impact, and it's still very nascent, but it started. And Lambda has proved the market. The other hyperscale public clouds have sort of furthered that along. You have things like OpenWhisk with an open source angle on that. But, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me in 2017 was security in DevOps. And Sec DevOps or DevSecOps, whichever way you want to say it, it seemed like its time has come. And increasingly, I'm hearing clients and vendors, end users and vendors talk about the need to inject security thinking and security people earlier into the development and the release process and the workflow. And so, whether it's driven by a proactive move to incorporate security yet not get in developers' ways, because we know that's sort of the big challenge there. Or it's sort of a reactive to the latest breach. That really does a lot to move the needle, and people, are willing to sort of adopt new thinking and pay for support to avoid some of the high-profile breaches that we've seen. So I think that's all combined to, a pretty some momentum and traction for security in DevOps, and that's a big difference from when DevOps began, right? So I mean, when it was somewhat incongruous with security, and the idea was, if you're not embarrassed of your code, you waited too long, right? Get it out there, push the code. Right. And today it's much more pragmatic, and that's come with the more mainstreaming of DevOps, to where enterprises are having to deal with security and compliance and regulatory issues.
Yeah, as they start to bring the DevOps initiatives back under a fold of governance, where they have to try and coordinate it with all the other work that's happening and all the other deliverables and deliveries that they're making. Right. It's super important that you can't have one chink in the armor that never gets addressed. You need to absolutely sort of bring that into the fold. That is interesting. Anders had a fantastic panel on that. I don't know if you were able to catch that, Mike, when you were at the show, with some security experts. John Willis was on there. He's an advisor to Electric Cloud. Alan Schimmel from DevOps.com sort of hosted it. It was just a fantastic conversation. Rob Stroud from Forrester was on the panel. So really, really interesting. And it was, again, people need to try and figure that out. GDPR is coming over in Europe, and you have to make sure that you're addressing any place where someone could put something malicious in that pipeline or skip a step in that pipeline. You have to make sure that that is coherent and secure and well governed. Absolutely. Anders, you've been uncharacteristically quiet. What's bouncing around up in your head? 2017.
What's bouncing around in my head is that all the good topics have already been taken. That's credit to our guests as always.
Exactly.
I think probably the one thing that kind of struck me most this year, from the point of view of, we're a vendor in the space, is the decrease in the amount of kind of missionary selling that we have to do in terms of the conversations are much more about how do we do DevOps, not why do we do DevOps or what is this thing called DevOps, Mm-hmm. And I think the security thing is actually an interesting angle on that, because it's been quite prevalent in terms of people are getting mature about security in some ways, right? And are realizing that yes, there's a reactive and there's a proactive part of it, and you want to be able to be reactive, right? Because you're never going to be able to be completely proactive. You are not in complete control of the ecosystem and your supply chain. You just aren't. OpenSSL, et cetera. The fact is, you have to be both proactive in terms of code analysis and static and dynamic analysis and those kinds of things. But then you also have to be able to be reactive, because you may have to send out a new OpenSSL, not to pick on those on that. Well, no, I will pick on that. You may have to be able to deliver a new OpenSSL build, very quickly to a large piece of infrastructure, and that requires, being reactive. And the interesting thing for me was our prospects, customers, people that I talk to, are seeing that in terms of the software pipeline, and are thinking about this in terms of the software pipeline. And whereas 5 years ago the software pipeline was some guy in the corner named Bob, who did the deployments and did the builds and so on. Now, people are very naturally just kind of talking about, well, that means we have to add another stage to our software pipeline in order to do that sort of test, every time or every week or every release or whatever the cadence and frequency required is. And so to me, it's very encouraging, because that means that, the message is starting to sink in a little bit. And I think to be able to hear that kind of thing repeated back to us in the field means that not only is the message out there, but people are actually using it and seeing benefits.
It's a great organizing principle that they've.
Yeah. And it's it's kind of a, I don't want to call it a turning point or an inflection point. That might be a little bit too much, but really are seeing, much more discussion about how, not why, and that's always encouraging. That happened.
That's interesting. We had the statistics of from the DevOps Enterprise Summit. 1,500 attendees.
Yeah, it just gets interesting. We can hear the statistics.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And from those 1,500 people,
we lost you at
Sam,
15.
we lost you after, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You lost me at 1,500. So 1,500 people, the largest event we've ever done, sold out. 500 companies. But there are companies there, some large airlines, they sent 40 people to the show. Large government agencies sent a lot of people to the show. So again, to your point, Anders, it's not about the lone wolf who goes out and says, what is this DevOps thing? Is this interesting to us at all? But, hey, this DevOps thing is interesting. How do I get my teams to work together to try and deliver the benefits of this new way of working to my organization so that I'm not caught flat-footed and I can be, as EMA talks about, I can be a digital attacker, right? I need to be the ones who are setting that agenda.
And I think
Sam,
also,
how was the split? How was the split between the 1,500 people in terms of Dev and Ops? Do you know?
So I did a very informal poll on the second morning, and I said, "Hey, good morning, devs," and I got, I would say, 50% of people clapping and saying good morning, and then I said, "Good morning, ops," and I got about the other 50%, and then I said, "Good morning, DevOps," and everybody said good morning. Wow. And so my informal poll, I don't think these statistics would hold up to like a Nicole Forsgren level amount of scrutiny. But I would say 100% DevOps and maybe 50% Dev and 50% Ops.
Wow, that's true. You can double prices for the sponsors next year. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm double dipping. That's funny. All right.
I would also kind of echo what Tom said in terms of, architecture. Software architectures and deployment architectures are really on people's minds these days. And I think very few people are starting out with any new efforts that aren't paying huge amounts of attention to things like containers and microservices and those kinds of things. And legions of existing software applications are kind of, people are trying to figure out, how do we move forward with this? How do we evolve our architecture? I think that'll continue to be a discussion for years to come, quite frankly, because some of these apps are going to take years to transform. But I think that's a big topic in the industry as well.
There was a large financial institution that we worked with, and they had a vendor day where they said all the little vendors come in and we'll help you understand how to work with a company of our size. And during that sort of conversation, they gave a presentation that said 20% of our workloads, we think we can move those to being containerized. And this was sort of end of 2016, beginning of 2017. And between then and now, of course, serverless has arrived. And so I'm assuming that out of that 20%, there's probably a good 5% that is probably better suited towards serverless. And then of that 5% next year, what's going to show up next year that's going to further fragment sort of their architecture and their stated direction, that's going to start to get complicated for people to try and bring that stuff to some level of standardization as we look at what's coming next. You like that?
I think after Lambda and serverless, we're going to have like microcode as a service.
Well, you got unikernels, right?
Yep.
You got all sorts of wacky.
We already have serverless containers with Fargate, right?
Yeah.
So let's see.
Just tell Alexa what you want and you get it, right?
Right.
Not really. Not if you have a German accent, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys saw that, I don't know which program, I think it was South Park, where they actually said, hey, Alexa, order us a bunch of diapers. And anybody who had their TV on and had an Alexa ended up getting a delivery of diapers.
That's a good one.
So that's a nappy hack right there. That's a pretty good one.
Was Amazon smart enough to figure out whether you needed children's diapers or adult diapers?
That comes back to what we're going to talk about now, which is what do we think is going to be on people's minds next year? What are some of your predictions for things that are going to pop next year? Is that AI to know what size diaper you need? Is that blockchain to confirm that you wore the diaper or that you bought the diaper? So let's start. Who am I going to start with today? With this time, Jay. Jay, why don't you go ahead and give us your thoughts?
Well, let's
Right on.
switch analogies from diapers first, but
okay, fair enough.
you know, actually, one of the things that I'm expecting to see more of, and starting to hear more of now, is open source software in DevOps. And we put out an article earlier this year that talked about the advantages of having open source software, you know, prevalent in your DevOps implementation, and of companies using at least 60% of their DevOps portfolio as open source. 54% reached the fully deployed DevOps state, with all their development occurring via DevOps models. And only 30% of the companies that had 25 to 60% of open source tools reached that state, and only 20% of companies with low levels of open source usage had managed to progress it. So we sort of proved that open source software can be a catalyst in DevOps, and I think that there's a growing awareness, and leadership is seeming to get this. And all of this seems to be going with more top-down management level adoption of DevOps. We're well beyond the grassroots, you know, bottom up. And so I think that that is going to be, you know, as we see open source is playing a pretty significant role in containers. It's a part of serverless, as I mentioned, with like projects like OpenWhisk. And it's a pretty prevalent part of enterprise IT today. And I think that, you know, in DevOps, it's where some of the flexibility and those types of advantages have gone. And I guess the other thing I'd say is there's, you know, still confusion maybe, or people talk about confusion. What is DevOps? And I'm not surprised to hear Anders talk about more, you know, how rather than why, because I kind of feel like we do have a pretty good definition of DevOps. It means speed and efficiency and responsiveness, similar to the way that open source software is pretty positively associated with flexibility and cost savings. A similar phenomenon going, and that sort of, you know, that thinking sort of tends to grow, and I think we'll see more discussion and more prevalence of open source software in DevOps models.
Absolutely. And you've been, I mean, you look back at open source banks, a lot of Microsoft Windows inside of those big old banks, but you look at the new disruptive banks that are coming up, and if you looked at their infrastructure, I'm betting you that they're not running Windows, right? I'm betting that's like Linux with a bunch of containers and stuff on it for simple and things like that. Truly, yeah, absolutely. And there are so many people, it's very hard to out-innovate the crowd, a passionate crowd, right? People who care deeply about it. But it does have, you know, open source stuff does have some drawbacks. If you don't have the expertise, if you don't have the people to support it. So you just have to sort of choose your poison, I guess, if you will. That's great, Jay. Mike Kavis, thoughts about 2018. Where do you see us going?
Well, I think there's a big push to machine learning, artificial intelligence, all that stuff. CTP spent a lot of time this year helping people move from on-prem big data solutions to cloud native in Amazon and Google and Microsoft. And now they're starting to build on top of it without having to wait, you know, 6 months to provision and do all that stuff. So from our customers, we're seeing a lot of companies now set to start building real fast. The apps are exposing data to their data scientists at speeds which they couldn't do before. So I don't know what they're going to produce from that, but I expect to see a lot more data scientists with access, where before they were kind of handcuffed. And I expect to see companies try to get their arms around what can we do with this gold mine of data we've been collecting forever that's been costing us a lot of money and we're not getting a lot of ROI out of it. So I think we're going to see a lot of stuff in that space. I want to piggyback one thing on the open source thing. In addition to DevOps driving that, I think another thing driving the adoption is we're moving to a consumption model. And licensing just doesn't make sense anymore, especially when you got to throw it on top of each CPU that you're already running on a rate. So it's kind of got two drivers driving that.
Yeah, Yep, absolutely. The subscription economy is definitely here. People want on-demand access to whatever it is that they want. You talked about sort of that operating model.
Operating model.
Yeah, and big data. Do you see people applying? Do you foresee people applying the big data to their operating model?
Yeah, so they basically, I work a lot with banks, so just putting their data out on the cloud, scares the bejesus out of a lot of them. So that lower level stuff is being performed by an operations group with a lot of controls and stuff. But once all that ingestion and stuff is available, then the business units can do whatever they want with it. So it's kind of a federated operating model where we control some basic services, but once you have access to data, do what you want with it. And that's kind of like an infrastructure as a service type operating model where they're providing the lower level services and giving you data, and then you do whatever you want with it.
So do you think that we're going to have data scientists sort of embedded inside of DevOps teams to help improve their operational model? I believe that's.
I don't know, because typically, at least from what I've seen, the data scientists are totally in the business and don't interact much with IT unless they want data. So maybe,
Right.
But as we saw on stage there at DOS 17, they kept talking about shifting everything left, right? The first bottleneck was infrastructure. We shift infrastructure left. Then they shift security and QA left. Then they start ERC left. There's no reason to believe that someday you don't start shipping data science to the left. So I never thought of that before. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to start watching that one. But that could happen. Those guys on stage, maybe next year, that's where they're at because they're a few years ahead of everybody else.
Yeah. So in the blog post, you're going to get credit for that. That's your prediction. And you're going to say, if it's not right, I'm going to give Sam a humongous bottle of scotch. So you've got that going for you, which is awesome. All right. Let's see. Torsten, what are your thoughts on what's coming down the pike in 2018? What are you looking at? Oh, I'm going to go to
Oops.
Torsten is side.
Oh, man. Am I the only one who dropped? I don't know. Okay.
Are you all right? You were upside down there for a minute.
Oh, yeah, I feel a little bit sick.
That's a first. So I can go to someone else, Torsten, and then come back to you. We're on 2018, and what are your thoughts about what's happening in 2018?
Oh, yeah, I heard everything until the last 5 seconds or 10 seconds. So I think at reInvent, there were two very interesting pieces. One of them was Fargate. I mentioned that briefly before, where we basically have serverless containers, another type of architecture, which is kind of an intermediate step, right, between containers and ultimately just consuming the services directly. So that's what, again, I always say, if I have a company or a development team, I tell them explore serverless first, then explore, serverless containers, then explore containers, then explore, and go down the stack like this. So it'll be much, much more minimizing what you have to manage. And at the same time, and it's quite interesting, right? I have my little home project with machine learning this weekend. I had one, and I thought, okay, let's compare recognition to the Azure equivalent. I forget what it's called, Azure video.
You're like a nerd. Look at you.
Well, when I have a use case, right, and my use case was very interesting. It's a machine to machine interface. To read out from old systems, data from old systems and pull it into new systems, and the old systems being old monitoring and measuring devices. And it's incredible, right? I did a quick prototype, as we always say, do a quick prototype if you do machine learning to see if it works. And all three of them, so Watson didn't support what I was trying to do at all in terms of extracting text from pictures, recognition, and the Google visual engine and the Azure one. They both did it, but it was so unreliable what I got without pre-processing, right? And I did some pre-processing, but then it went into a rabbit hole where I said, okay, I can either play with the kids and have some free time, or become a programmer again. But what this shows is it was a very simple use case of identifying text independently of where it appears on the screen, independently of the font, independently of the size, and everything like that. And I couldn't even get this done because the error rate was just so high; it would have killed my whole controlling idea that I had. So that
0%
again,
to 100%. You know, let's
yes,
not
it was
quibble. You know.
exactly. It was a very timid example for machine learning, where I thought, oh man, that should have gone in an hour and a half. I should have had something together, but. That's really not what it looks like today. And the question that I get a ton from my customers, of course, is what do I do next in machine learning? What is the potential in my data center efficiency, in my continuity, in my performance and user experience at the end? How do I leverage it to get better services to my customers, to lose fewer customers? And I always have to take a big step back because the expectations are pretty high and undefined. And on the other hand, what you can do is very specific, and sometimes you even have to prove a very specific context, like identifying numbers on a video stream, right? I don't know if you guys would have thought that is not reliable, and maybe the resolution was too low. I don't think so. I used my iPhone 7 Plus with a double camera, but what I'm saying is that there's a lot of wrinkles to bring this and change the data center economics when even some of the very basics don't work yet.
So if I could sum up, so even if you're using the latest iPhone and you're an EMA analyst who's never done big data before, even that person can't figure out how to do it. So it's not here yet. It hasn't arrived.
No, put me in the camp of kind of a little bit curmudgeonly and skeptical of how quickly quote unquote AI and machine quote unquote learning will kind of overtake. There's certainly things that it's good at, but it's very narrow and very specific problems.
Right. And it's the micromodeling problem, where you have to invest and invest and invest, and it's a very rigid structure that you're creating, or you invest in something global, and then it doesn't cover all the use cases, or not reliably cover all the use cases.
And as we get deeper into that too, I think there's going to be more kind of interesting problems. And we were talking about what is GDPRS, the new European legislation that goes into effect next year. There's also talk of other legislation, such as if you are using machine learning or artificial intelligence to make decisions, such as, am I going to approve this loan, or am I going to let this person enter the country, that you have to provide the reasoning that the machine learning used to come to that conclusion. Machine learning doesn't do that. That's not how neural networks work.
Right.
It's the training problem. When is it trained enough, and how do you fit the model?
Yeah. So if you were to take your admittedly singular experience here on just recognizing numbers and images, we're a long way from that kind of reliability and general applicability. So I think there's going to be I'm sure we'll see some kind of very interesting use cases, and certainly labeling images and that kind of stuff where it's you can throw a lot of compute power at it, and the stakes are low if you get it wrong.
Right.
Oh, that's not grandma, that's grandpa. Big deal. We're a long way from where this is a generally applicable technology. That's my curmudgeonly, kind of take on that. Hopefully, I'm wrong, because I think this stuff is cool.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, that sort of brings it a little bit back to what Mike said in terms of data scientists, right? This is going to come down to people again, and we've seen that in DevOps before, and we talked about security. So I think, security, data scientists, those are a couple of key stakeholders that we will probably see more and more in DevOps meetings and DevOps thinking, or they should be, right?
I think add DBAs to that list as well.
DBAs for sure. Yeah.
How about mainframe people?
And mainframe people, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I comment on the DBA part. After a lot of the DBA type of abstraction I saw at Amazon. If you're a DBA that's also not a data architect, I don't know we're going to see you that much anymore. So when we say DBA, hopefully we're talking about the ones that actually design stuff, but the ones that just manage infrastructure, I'd be training for something right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you have administrator in your job title, that's a, you know, look for alternate training, because the administrative parts of this, that will go away.
That's going away. So is that a prediction, Anders, for 2018?
I don't think it'll happen in 2018 or 2019, but I mean, you know, so much of the stuff is it's the architecture part that's interesting, not the administrative part, which I think is kind of just, you know, kind of echoing what everybody else is saying.
Okay. Tom, do you have any thoughts? You've been quiet.
Yeah, automation is going to be big in 2018, and not necessarily AI, ML driven automation. Automation of continuous testing, including security, and I think that's how we end up with DevSecOps, eliminating glitch risk and speeding release cycles. And the reason that's important, we've talked about security, we've talked about AI, ML. Automation is critical because we don't have the talent, and we're not going to have the talent for the next 5 to 10 years to do this. So it's going to require automation to get this stuff done. That's what I'm hearing from the people I talk to. Yeah. And then there's also solutions out there providing visibility into the entire SDLC as well as the infrastructure, because DevOps teams need to be able to see what's going on every step of the way, so that there's not finger pointing, so that there is collaboration, and you get rid of any culture glitches that are preventing DevOps from being successful.
By providing that transparency and providing that end-to-end view of where in a non-blaming fashion, where are our slowdowns? Where are we finding slowdowns? And that, to the point that Mike was making earlier about getting that data scientist within that team, it's a great prediction, by the way, I love it. Getting that person in the team allows you to treat that product, that pipeline, like a product. You can continuously improve your pipeline as long as you got feedback, and that's what DevOps is all about. So it's pretty meta to treat your DevOps, the instantiation of what your DevOps process looks like, and to treat that with DevOps patterns to make it better. That's my prediction in 2018, is we're going to see a lot of companies doing that. It's trying to make that process, just tighten it up, get that feedback, get that visibility, hit the automation points that you talked about, because you get the auditability and that repeatability. So I agree with that one 100%.
And one more point, building off of what Jay was talking about with open source, I think you're going to see a lot more cross-platform, omni-platform, so that regardless of what solution someone chooses to use, it can plug and play with other solutions.
Yep. I think that's also very important.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Nope.
Well, I was going to just say that a big part of the open source aspect is the end users, right? Open source used to be all about the developers, and now we see large enterprises very active and participatory in open source software, and you know, they know what's good for them, and that's where you get these sort of omni, you know, net neutrality aside, perhaps, you know, but I think that we do see more a prominent role for the end users in open source software, and they're helping to drive a lot of these communities and projects, and that's very meaningful for the rest of the other companies that maybe aren't, you know, Fortune 50 or Fortune 500, and that all contributes to more sort of mainstreaming of DevOps that's going to continue.
Yeah. Standardization and innovation, and that passion that these folks bring into that open source world. One of the reasons I love DevOps is that people are so passionate about it, and that's a fun place to be, right? You don't see a lot of people that are really truly passionate about security. Maybe there are, and so I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate mail, but it's just,
there needs to be more.
Okay, I'm sure I'm in trouble now. So Anders, why don't you save me? Why don't you tell me what you think's coming in 2018?
You know, I think I'm hoping, you know, that Tom's right about the automation part, because certainly that, you know, not just from a self-interest, you know, kind of point of view, since that's what we do for a living, but I think it's also, I think it'd be kind of really interesting to see how wide end to end people take that automation, because what we see, what we still see quite a bit today is kind of that sort of fragmented automation, or one phrase that we use a lot is islands of automation, silos of automation. And if you've ever looked at a value stream mapping, kind of output, I was at a customer in Northern Ireland a week or so ago, and they had done a value stream mapping of their entire process, and it was kind of cool to see, but also it was interesting because each kind of unit of work was 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 6 hours, and then the delays in between stages were 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. So of the 30 days of elapsed time that they spent on this process, maybe like 12 hours was work, and the other was just waiting.
Coordination.
And coordination, right? Not even coordination, just, I'm
Lack
done
of
with it.
coordination.
So I'm going to send an email to the next person, and then in the morning when they pick up on that, they're going to start working on it. And, that's really where a lot of the time goes, honestly, is kind of those interstitial pieces between silos. And then when something goes wrong, which it will, we all seem to be very good at planning for the happy path, which no doubt there's psychology
Everything's gonna be great.
Awesome. Being Swedish, I am genetically predisposed to not do that. But the problem with those kind of scenarios is whenever you have to go back and repeat a set of stages, you introduce that delay again and again and again. And this is where the time goes, honestly. It's not that we're slow at doing our work. It's not that we all need to go to typing school to learn how to type faster, to get the software out faster, right? It's really just the process that needs to be streamlined and improved. And so my hope and my prediction is that automation will be king in 2018, and really start to accelerate the adoption of DevOps, and also accelerate the how quickly we get the benefits, because you get a lot of that time back. You can do cool stuff with it. And the State of DevOps report from this year, I think the number was like 40% more time spent on work if you're a high performing DevOps organization.
Productive, moving the ball forward work, innovation
work, as opposed to kind of treading water.
Keeping lights on, yeah.
That's huge. That is huge. And companies that will do that and do that well, they will succeed. So as long as what they're putting into their software pipeline is good, they will succeed as companies. Whereas if your pipeline is crap, then it doesn't matter how good your software is. Sometimes you just won't be able to succeed.
Yeah, and I think that those ones who are able to figure it out, they're going to be accelerating away from those people who haven't yet.
The more experiments you can run, the more things you can put in front of your customer, the more, the quicker you. All of these things will obviously have competitive impact.
Right. So that's interesting. So we talk about sort of infrastructure as code and process as code and making sure you've got fidelity. But that AI portion, if you're really just running experiments, which I totally agree with that from a DevOps perspective, every time you put one change to your source code, everything else should be locked down and invariable. And that one variability is what you're testing. But human beings looking at the outcome of that, we might not be able to see all of the subtleties that some AI ML that's tuned to look for 3 months down the road. How did that move the needle from a revenue perspective or a customer satisfaction perspective? Many different patterns that human beings just don't have the bandwidth to be able to look at all that data. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
There's probably some good that can be done there. Put me still in the camp of AI can't tell you the questions to ask.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
but there's
really
companies that are trying, and that I find really intriguing.
Oh, absolutely. And there's some interesting things. I have a friend who works at Google, and he tells all kinds of interesting stories about what they're finding out as they start to push machine learning and deep learning in various fields. Like they're fairly convinced that human identification of fingerprints is bullshit. That it's actually very error prone scenario, which obviously would have massive implications. Just like they figured out like hair analysis actually, well, somebody else has figured out that like hair analysis is a little bit of BS as well, or not nearly as reliable as it might, appear to be.
Seem to be right
on TV and in the court system sometimes. But also interesting things they found out are, correlations that you have to watch out for are things like the interesting correlation they found in one set of data was it mattered who the technician was who was doing the DNA analysis, who was moving stuff from place to place, because there was a correlation between that technician and various outcomes because he or she was contaminating results or contaminating.
Right. That technician did all of those murders. That's so weird. Yeah.
So, but it's still one of those things where it can't tell you the question to ask. Still, hopefully, we'll get there. But I seem to be pigeonholing myself as the AI curmudgeon, but. And I'm not. I actually think it's awesome stuff, and we'll see awesome things happen.
That's true. Right. It's true, but you see a lot of the AI companies getting slammed for. And see, as an analyst, I slam a company if their AI model is too broad because they're not covering enough use cases, and if it's too narrow, I also slam them because they are too domain specific and not scalable. So.
Damned if you do and damned if you don't.
That's right. That's
right.
And I think
that's the biggest problem. How much domain-specific knowledge do I have? How broad can I get my model? And if I have legacy, then it's even harder. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, and this sort of highlights how responsiveness is a big part of DevOps, and we're gonna, the companies and the organizations and the teams that can respond to these real-world scenarios of this magical technology, those are going to be the ones that are winning. And I think that, we'll see that will become a key capability to be able to respond to some of these sort of, oh, oops, we overlooked, this or that, and everybody got an order of diapers. Here I go back to the analogy I didn't like, but but that responsiveness, has always been a part of DevOps, whether it's the next new technical thing in containers, or whether it's the Ebola virus, or I used to have a slide with all these different things. The Heartbleed outbreak. I mean, there's any number of things that you're going to have to respond to, and I think AI and machine learning are going to introduce some more of those.
Right, to be able to deal with your auto responses from your own organization and try and manage how your organization automatically responds to things could be a whole discipline in itself to manage that. As an organism, basically. That's interesting. So we got 8 minutes left. I'm going to go through each one of you. What is some of let's just name a New Year's resolution that you think you want to focus on, or that you'd like your clients or the people that you work with, one of the things that you think they should be paying attention to. And Jay, you are on my screen, so I'm going to start with you first. What is a New Year's resolution for 2018?
More women, I think, is a theme that is going to be big. And I think, DevOps is one area where you already see women in leadership positions, in engineering technical positions. And I expect to see more of that, and I welcome it. I mean, there's plenty of research that shows the more women you have in the organization, the more women you have in leadership, the better off the organization is going to be, and the more successful. So I think that would be a good, there's certainly a dearth of DevOps talent. It's one of those skills that's in demand, but lacking very much. And I think that, we'll see women can maybe play a role in sort of filling that gap. And I think that's a good thing. And it's already seems to be happening across the industry. And we still have a ways to go, but I think that that's a real good thing for DevOps and for the industry.
Love it. More inclusiveness and more equality across all races, genders, sexual inclinations, all of those things. I totally agree. There's room for everybody's opinion. Love it. Let's go. Tom Smith.
Yes, sir. Building off what Jay was saying about speed, I'm going to go a little more holistic on that. And instead of DevOps thinking about delivering software, think about delivering value that provides an outstanding customer experience, because that is how companies are going to differentiate themselves moving faster. And as such, they need to listen and respond to their customers very quickly to provide that outstanding customer experience. And one more that I just thought about after looking at last year's presentation, there are going to be DevOps failures. However, if there is a DevOps failure, you have to look within your own company as to why it is failing. There are cultural issues within your company you better fix, or you're not going to be around.
Right, absolutely. And you know, the CEO of Equifax, he looked within his own company and he found the guy who was responsible. So
Great.
he fixed the problem. Right? So that's good. I love that you're calling that out. Thank you.
Supported.
Good one.
Maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. I think I'm probably misusing that example. But I'm doing it on purpose, and you guys know that, so that's good. All right. Torsten.
Gaps. Get rid of the gaps. And at DevOps Summit, I had a couple of interesting conversations. You know, there's always the companies that want to be affiliated, the vendors that want to be affiliated with DevOps, and I'm very suspicious of that. But this time, I talked with a bunch of them. They were there for all the right reasons. For example, one of them was batch jobs, bring them into the life cycle. Then there were a whole bunch of them databases. I have SQL servers that reach 4 versions back, and I can't really know what happens if I push the data. Usually it's fine, but sometimes it's not, right? Machine learning, the models, that's a really interesting piece, right? If somebody can build a semi-universal machine learning module for business people that they can use for a specific task and reuse in a parameterized way, that needs to also be an artifact in the DevOps process. So finding more and more of those gaps and putting artifacts where they were so that they can be reused and automated. And yeah, test automation, huge deal, right? I've suffered from that when I was still doing work. I've suffered from that tremendously, to not be able to do realistic test automation at the right size and all of this. So all of those gaps that currently don't have artifacts to be fully automated. That's the biggest resolution I would have, and the biggest advice I would have to fill those in.
Yeah, and the other thing that you miss with those gaps is the data, right? The metadata around the process. If it's a manual handoff, then all the knowledge that had gone on before, there's no way for you to sort of carry that forward and inform the process moving forward. And nothing happens in a vacuum. Yeah, excellent.
Yep.
Awesome, Mike.
Yeah, two things. One is on the DevOps side, focusing more with clients on the people and process side. There's a lot of companies that are automating everything, but they're automating value streams that shouldn't be automated, right? So we're doing a lot of work with clients. I mentioned, what's the new operating model look like, but also, get all the players in the room and say, let's look at this end-to-end process. And before you write a lick of code to automate it, why don't you improve the process? So
you need to do it all. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of companies hit a wall where, they can do a build in 5 minutes, but it still takes 30 days to approve to do the build and 30 days to approve to put it in production after. So, you can work on that CI/CD process all day long, but you gotta kill the waste on both sides of that. The second thing is this whole big data, machine learning, AI. I'm gonna hit on something Tom said about value. Our focus is going to be getting value out of the data, whether you're getting that out of machine learning, AI, or just your MicroStrategy tool or whatever. I think there's gold there that people, first of all, the quality of their data is not that great. And second of all, they don't know how to get stuff out of it. And they may be going right to AI and they haven't even captured the basics on how to get value out of there. So we're going to be focusing a lot on getting value, business value out of data.
Awesome. And Anders, last but not least.
I think one of my goals is to use more sunscreen, which I'm going to have to do here as the sun is creeping into where I'm sitting. So I have one thing that I sort of as a personal goal next year, which is I want to stop using the word legacy as much. We tend to use that in lots of different contexts. Oftentimes it just means software that's already been written or not written by me. And I think what I want to do is sort of hew a little bit more closely to Michael Feather's, I think, definition of legacy, which is code which is not tested or testable, and sort of be careful about that, because a lot of times, one person's legacy software is another person's, paycheck. And you know, these things are keeping the lights on and keeping the money rolling in. And yeah, it might have been written 30 years ago, but that doesn't change the fact that it, you know, it kind of works and is bringing the money in, and we got to figure out how to evolve that forward. And I think legacy has kind of become a, you know, it's a little bit of a pejorative word. So I just want to, you know, I want to be a little bit more crisp in my application of that word in 2018. So that's my personal.
Because in 2017, your definition of legacy was code that you didn't write.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, which means everything is legacy.
Right, except for the stuff that you just wrote. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, you know, I think it's become one of those words that we toss around a lot, and I think we need to get more precise in our application of it, because the assumption is, oh, we can't do DevOps with legacy software. Well, that's wrong, right? You can do untested software. Yes, you're going to have a difficult time doing it, but there's nothing wrong with doing DevOps with mainframes. There's nothing wrong with doing DevOps with monolithic applications. There's nothing wrong with doing DevOps for firmware for devices. I mean, it's all DevOpsable.
I feel a Dr. Seuss book coming on. This is I love this. All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. This has been a fantastic conversation with some of the biggest brains in the industry, talking about 2017 and predictions for 2018. I want to thank each of you for joining us, and we will be taking a break on C9D9 until I think our next episode is going to start back up after the holidays. So look for more information on that, and we'll see you on the next episode of C9D9. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you.